That's just a very unlikely place to expect an elusive creature like Sasquatch is described as to venture out into the open in the broad of daylight. I would suspect it would be more likely to investigate or take advantage of that under the cover of darkness.
In 2012, a motion-activated camera hidden deep inside the forests of Alberta captured something so disturbing, 3 wildlife biologists reportedly walked away from the investigation rather than explain it. Not because the footage was fake, but because they couldn't identify what they were looking at. And once you see the details, you may understand why. For decades, stories of massive humanoid creatures lurking in remote wilderness were treated like campfire legends. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, different names, same impossible creature. Most people laughed at the idea. Until the cameras started recording things no one could explain. And the deeper researchers looked, the quieter the skeptics became. Because across forests, mountains, and isolated wilderness around the world, witnesses who had never met each other began describing the exact same thing. Towering height, human-like movement, unnatural intelligence, and the terrifying feeling of being watched. One of the strangest encounters began with a YouTuber known as Desert Sasquatch. He had spent nearly 6 hours hiking through one of the most isolated wilderness regions in North America. This wasn't a tourist trail filled with hikers and campsites. This was true backcountry, the kind of place where a broken ankle could become a death sentence. No signal, no roads, no quick rescue, just endless forest stretching for miles in every direction. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then he noticed the claw marks. Fresh scratches carved deep into a tree trunk, high above eye level. Sap still dripped from the bark like the wounds were recent. Something powerful had been there not long before him. Most people would have turned around right there. He kept walking. And thankfully for us, he kept filming. The farther he traveled, the stranger the forest became. Branches snapped at impossible heights. Vegetation looked crushed by something massive moving through it. Even the sounds of nature began disappearing. No birds, no insects, just silence. The kind of silence that makes your instincts start screaming before your brain understands why. Later, he described the forest as feeling wrong, like the entire place was waiting for something. Still, he continued deeper. When he finally returned home and uploaded the footage, he expected normal hiking comments. Instead, hundreds of viewers all pointed to the exact same moment, same timestamp, same question. What is standing in the trees? At first, he didn't even see it. But after replaying the footage several times, there it was. Partially hidden inside the thick brush stood a gigantic dark figure, motionless, watching him. For a brief moment, skeptics had easy explanations. A tree stump, a shadow, an oddly shaped bush. But those explanations collapsed the moment viewers slowed the footage frame by frame. Because the figure moved, not like branches swaying in the wind, not like shifting shadows. This was controlled movement, intentional movement. The thing appeared to subtly shift its body position, adjusting itself to maintain visual contact with the hiker below. And suddenly, the footage became much harder to dismiss. Experts who later analyzed the proportions noticed details that deeply unsettled them. The arms appeared unusually long, hanging far lower than a normal human's. The shoulders looked impossibly broad, and the way the figure stayed partially concealed behind the trees suggested something even more disturbing. Awareness. It understood concealment. It knew how to remain hidden. Whether it was observing him, stalking him, or simply deciding whether he was a threat, nobody knows. What makes the encounter truly horrifying is this. The hiker never realized how close he actually was. At one point, he walked within roughly 30 yards of the figure, completely unaware something enormous was tracking him through the woods. Had he noticed it in real time? Panic might have triggered the worst possible outcome. But whatever was in those trees allowed him to leave. And that raises an even darker question. How many people have walked through remote wilderness believing they were alone, while something silently watched from the shadows? But the forests of North America aren't the only place these sightings occur, because thousands of miles away, high in the frozen mountains of Nepal, 2 climbers captured footage of something that should not have been able to survive there at all. The locals had spoken about it for centuries. They called it the Yeti, Western explorers mocked the stories for generations, dismissing them as folklore created by isolated mountain tribes, until a camera captured a figure crossing a Himalayan mountainside under conditions that nearly killed experienced climbers. The two mountaineers had been struggling through brutal weather at extreme altitude. Every breath burned. The freezing wind sliced through their gear. Even walking became exhausting. Then one of them spotted movement in the distance. At first, they assumed it was another climber, but something felt wrong immediately. The figure wasn't struggling. It wasn't stumbling through the snow. While the climbers fought desperately just to stay upright, this thing moved effortlessly across the mountain like the environment meant nothing to it. Calm, steady, completely unaffected by conditions that push humans to the edge of death. Then they noticed the body. Massive, covered entirely in thick, dark fur. Not winter gear, not heavy clothing. Fur, natural insulation built for surviving extreme cold. The two men stood frozen, watching the figure move across the white landscape before eventually vanishing into the blizzard itself. And as terrifying as the footage was, one detail disturbed researchers most of all. The similarities, the same towering height, the same unnatural movement, the same avoidance of humans. Whatever was seen in the Himalayas looked disturbingly similar to what had been filmed hiding inside North American forests. Different continent, same creature, or perhaps the same species. And if that possibility sounds impossible, the next encounter becomes even harder to explain, because this time the evidence wasn't captured on video. It was left behind in the mud. The man at the center of the Oregon incident wasn't known for telling wild stories. Quite the opposite. He was a veteran elk hunter who had spent decades surviving in some of the harshest wilderness in the Pacific Northwest. People trusted him because he wasn't dramatic, wasn't superstitious, and never exaggerated anything. If he claimed he saw something, there was usually proof. And what happened to him deep inside the Oregon forest changed him permanently. He had set up camp miles from the nearest road in an area so remote that seeing another human out there was almost impossible. Ancient trees surrounded him in every direction. No lights, no noise. Just wilderness untouched for thousands of years. As night settled over the forest, he sat near his camp organizing gear when something exploded out of the darkness. A rock. Not a pebble. Not loose debris falling downhill. A 25-pound stone thrown directly at his head. It missed him by inches before crashing into a tree hard enough to leave a visible impact mark. The hunter immediately understood something terrifying. That wasn't an accident. Something had aimed at him. The rest of the night became a nightmare. He stayed awake with his rifle across his lap, listening to every sound in the darkness around him. Twigs snapping, leaves shifting, heavy movement somewhere beyond the trees. Every instinct told him he wasn't alone anymore. When sunrise finally arrived, fear gave way to curiosity. He needed to know what had thrown that rock. So he searched the area around his campsite, and then he found the footprints. At first glance, they looked human. 5 toes, visible arch, bipedal structure, but the size made his blood run cold. The prints were enormous, far too large for any normal person, and they sank unusually deep into the ground, suggesting incredible body weight behind them. As he followed the tracks through the forest, another horrifying detail became clear. The creature wasn't wandering randomly. It was tracking deer, methodically, patiently, like a predator hunting prey. That's when the hunter realized why the rock had been thrown. He had unknowingly camped inside something's hunting territory. The projectile may not have been meant to kill him. It may have been a warning, or worse, a deliberate attempt to drive him away before he interfered. For several moments, he considered following the tracks deeper into the forest. But survival instinct finally overpowered curiosity. Because if something could throw a 25-pound rock with that kind of force, what could it do up close? He documented the prints, packed his gear, and left immediately. Researchers later studied the evidence extensively. Based on the depth of the impressions and stride length, estimates suggested a creature standing over 7 feet tall and weighing several hundred pounds. And the location itself created another problem for skeptics. The area was so isolated that staging an elaborate hoax there would have been nearly impossible. Whatever left those tracks was large, powerful, intelligent, and territorial. But even that evidence pales in comparison to what happened next. Because in rural Alberta, a simple wildlife trail camera captured footage so disturbing that experienced analysts reportedly refused to officially identify it. The camera had originally been placed by a trapper hoping to monitor normal wildlife activity. Deer, elk, maybe the occasional bear. Nothing unusual. For days, the footage showed exactly that. Then one recording changed everything. At first, the clearing looked normal. Trees swaying gently, sunlight breaking through branches. Then something appeared near the center of the frame, and instantly, the footage stopped feeling normal. The creature was massive, sitting calmly in the clearing like it belonged there, not passing through, not startled, relaxed, comfortable. Like this isolated section of forest was its territory. But it was the details that disturbed viewers most. The head shape didn't match a bear. Instead of rounded features, the skull appeared pointed, almost cone-shaped. The shoulders were unbelievably wide. The body looked thick with muscle beneath reddish-brown fur covering nearly every visible inch. And unlike sick or starving animals occasionally seen in the wild, this creature appeared healthy, strong, completely at ease. When the trapper first reviewed the footage, he reportedly replayed it over and over, trying to convince himself he was misinterpreting what he saw. Then he called family members to watch it with him. Everyone reacted the same way. Confusion first, then discomfort, then silence. Because the longer people looked at the footage, the less it resembled any known animal. Predictably, skeptics argued it was simply a bear sitting strangely. But that explanation created major problems. Bears don't have cone-shaped skulls. They don't sit with human-like posture for extended periods. And their body proportions don't match what appeared in the footage. Most disturbing of all were reports involving the wildlife analysts who later examined the recording. According to multiple accounts, 3 separate biologists declined to officially classify the creature. One allegedly admitted that identifying it honestly would force him to acknowledge something he wasn't prepared to accept. And after that, they reportedly stepped away from the analysis entirely. To this day, no verified explanation has fully accounted for what the Alberta trail camera captured. Estimates based on surrounding vegetation suggested the figure stood somewhere between 7 and 8 feet tall. Weight estimates exceeded 400 pounds. And after years of examination, no one has definitively proven what species appeared in that clearing. Eventually, the trapper removed the camera completely, not because it malfunctioned, but because he no longer wanted to know what else might walk through those woods after dark. And honestly, what happened to the next witness may explain why. Because unlike the others, he didn't discover the creature later on video. He saw it face to face, in real time. The solitary hiker had walked those trails for years. The forest felt familiar to him. Safe, predictable. It was the kind of place where people stopped checking over their shoulders because nothing bad had ever happened there before. That false sense of comfort vanished in seconds. He had been hiking alone most of the afternoon before stopping to rest beside a fallen log. He unpacked his lunch, sat quietly beneath the trees, and listened to the stillness of the forest around him. Then came the feeling. That sudden ancient instinct humans have carried since prehistoric times. The certainty that something nearby is watching you. He looked up and froze. Standing roughly 40 yards away between 2 massive trees was a figure so large his brain struggled to process it. At minimum 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur from head to toe. Its body looked unnaturally broad, almost blending into the shadows around it. But it was the eyes that terrified him most. The creature wasn't simply looking in his direction. It was staring directly at him, focused, aware. For several endless seconds, neither of them moved. The hiker later described feeling completely trapped inside that moment. His instincts screamed at him to run, but fear locked his muscles in place. Then the creature did something researchers still find deeply unsettling. It stepped sideways behind one of the trees, while continuing to watch him. Not fleeing, not attacking, concealing itself, like it understood visibility. Like it knew exactly how to stay hidden while maintaining sight of him. That behavior changed the encounter from frightening to disturbing. Because predators chase, animals flee. But this thing repositioned itself strategically, carefully, intelligently. The moment the hiker regained control of his body, he grabbed his backpack and started leaving the area as calmly as possible. Not running. Something deep inside him warned that running would trigger the worst possible outcome. So he walked, fast, every nerve in his body expecting heavy footsteps behind him at any second. But none came. The creature simply watched him leave. And the hiker never returned to that forest again. For years afterward, he avoided isolated trails completely, because once you experience something like that, the woods never feel empty again. But another witness wouldn't be nearly as lucky. A teenager named Jack encountered something during a family fishing trip that still haunts him decades later. He was 15 years old when he and his father traveled to a remote wilderness area near the Michigan boundary waters for their annual camping trip. They had visited the same location for years. Same lake, same campsite, same routines. That familiarity made what happened even worse. Late in the afternoon, Jack walked into the forest alone to collect firewood while his father prepared camp nearby. At first, everything felt normal. Then he noticed movement behind a tree, large movement. His immediate thought was bear. Black bears were common in the region, and normally they avoided people. Jack slowly backed away, preparing to scare it off. Then the figure stood up and kept standing. What emerged from behind the tree was not a bear. It was humanoid, massive, at least 8 feet tall. Dark fur covered its entire body, and its proportions looked terrifyingly human. Jack stopped breathing. Then the creature turned toward him. For one horrifying second, they locked eyes, and Jack realized something he still struggles to explain. There was intelligence in its expression, awareness, curiosity, like it was actively studying him. Then the creature opened its mouth and released a sound unlike anything Jack had ever heard. Not a roar, not an animal growl, something higher pitched, almost layered, like broken fragments of language mixed with an animal scream. The sound hit him so hard it triggered pure survival panic. Every instinct told him to run. Instead, his hand reached for his phone. Pure reflex. He raised the camera and snapped a photo just as the creature turned and disappeared violently into the trees. The sounds of its movement through the forest were enormous. Branches cracking, brush exploding apart, then sudden silence. Jack sprinted back to camp in complete panic. When he finally showed his father the image, the older man reportedly went pale almost immediately. The photograph remains one of the most debated pieces of alleged Sasquatch evidence online. The image appears to show a massive fur-covered figure mid-turn as it retreats into the woods, too upright to resemble a bear, too large to resemble a person, and proportioned unlike any known animal native to the region. Researchers who analyzed the photo pointed toward visible muscle structure beneath the fur, unusually long arms, and shoulder width far beyond normal human anatomy. Whatever appeared in that forest looked built for raw survival, built for strength, built for a world far older and harsher than our own. Jack and his father packed their campsite that same night and drove home in silence. They never returned to that lake again, but perhaps the most unsettling encounter of all wasn't aggressive. It wasn't violent. It was quiet. And that may be what makes it the most terrifying story in this entire documentary. A nature photographer spent an entire day hiking through a remote forest, documenting wildlife and scenery. Birds, deer, sunlight through the trees. By every account, it was a peaceful trip. Nothing unusual happened. Or at least, that's what he believed. Hours later, after returning home, he began reviewing the footage from his camera. That's when he noticed something standing partially hidden in the upper corner of one frame, a dark figure, watching him from behind a tree. At first, he assumed it was a visual mistake, until he checked earlier footage. Then earlier footage before that, the figure appeared again, and again, and again, sometimes barely visible, sometimes closer, always concealed, always watching. For nearly an entire hour, something had followed him silently through the forest without him ever noticing. No snapping branches, no warning sounds, no sign of movement. Just a hidden presence carefully shadowing him from a distance. When researchers analyzed the clips, one detail disturbed them more than anything else: the positioning. The figure repeatedly used trees and terrain to remain partially concealed from view while maintaining line of sight on the hiker. That isn't random animal behavior. That suggests awareness, planning, possibly even patience. And if that's true, then maybe these creatures aren't simply hiding from humans. Maybe they're studying us, watching, learning, waiting from places we rarely look. Because the deeper people venture into isolated wilderness, the more encounters begin to share the same chilling pattern. The feeling of being observed, the silence before sightings occur, the intelligence behind the behavior, and the terrifying realization that humans may not be the only intelligent hunters left roaming the wild places of this planet. Maybe that's why so many witnesses never returned to those forests. Not because they saw a monster, but because for one brief moment, something ancient saw them first.